So I sort of have this dream of reading a book from every country in the world. I've made some progress so far on this dream, but not with any sort of like concerted effort. I just sort of try to pick up books that I know are by people from countries I haven't read from. But I think it's time, now that I have you to hold me accountable, I think it's time I start taking this dream seriously. And what better way to start than on a week when I have 2 books checked out from the library from different countries in Africa and a book I just recently bought from a country in Africa. I've got 3 African countries represented that I can knock out this week during this video, which is my hope. I have read Half of a Yellow Sun, which that author is Nigerian, and I have read Homegoing, that author is from Ghana. I have read Petals of Blood, whose author is from Kenya, and I have read Nervous Conditions, whose author is from Zimbabwe. But I think those are the only 4 African countries I have visited in my reading. So I guess let me just really quickly clarify. My goal for this is that the author has to be from that country. So I would need to check on Homegoing and Half of a Yellow Sun, because I think those might be authors that were born in like the US. I'm not certain. I have to go check. But yeah, what I really would like to do is read a book by a person from that country who has like a very vested interest in that country and who has lived there for at least a significant amount of time. So this morning I got my hold for Things Fall Apart from the library, which I'm very excited about. I've had this on hold for many months and then it keeps coming in and I keep putting it off, but this is the week to do it, I think. This author is Nigerian. I've heard of this book as basically being a classic, so I am very intrigued to check it out. I think it sounds very good. The other book I have checked out is Woman at Point Zero by Nawal El-Saadawi, and this author is from Egypt. I know it's an Egyptian book, and I've heard it's sort of a little more feminist, which is fun because my other 2 books are written by men. So it would be nice to get an Egyptian woman's perspective. No, that's crazy. I almost said I should read a book by a woman from every country. That would be a great goal, but that might be just a little too restrictive, I think. But Nervous Conditions by Tsitsi Dangarembga was one of my favorite books so far in the first half of this year. So I think that I could have a really good time with this one as well. But that one I have on audiobook, and it's only like a 4-hour audiobook, so I should be able to finish it pretty easily. I am a little worried that I'm going to wish I had it physically and wish I could be annotating, though. That's my only problem with an audiobook, especially because I usually listen to them while on like a dog walk or a drive, so I cannot be taking notes, but I always have thoughts and I want to be taking notes. But I'll let you know how that one is. And then the final one I have is Season of Migration to the North by Tayeb Salih. I've been wanting to read this forever. I've heard incredible things. He is from Sudan. Yes, near the Nile in Sudan. This author is from Sudan, and I have heard really excellent things. I've heard it's sort of like a response maybe to Heart of Darkness. I don't know if that's entirely true. And the introduction of this book actually mentions Things Fall Apart, I'm pretty sure. I read like a little bit of the introduction of this already. So I feel like they're going to speak to each other really well. It's going to be really fun to read them back to back, I think. So I think this one and Things Fall Apart are a little bit more about like colonization, and then Woman at Point Zero is more about womanhood and femininity, which are 2 subjects of great interest to me. So I think I'm going to have an incredible week of reading, especially after I've had a sort of silly reading recently that I've been doing. So I'm excited to get into some serious, meaty stuff. I don't know what I'm going to start with yet, but I will come back and update you when I have completed the first book. And I'll let you know. And hopefully I can complete all 3 this week. So, without further ado, I'm getting reading. Okay, hello, I'm back. It is now Friday. So, yeah, didn't mean to take that long to check back in, but, my hair, frizzy hair girls unite. Don't worry about it. Sometimes a girl just has frizzy hair and there's nothing she can do, okay? So I have completed Season of Migration to the North and Woman at Point Zero. And I am currently about, I think, 17% of the way through Things Fall Apart, but I haven't been reading it very much. I think I could lock in today and tomorrow and finish it pretty easily in that amount of time. For sure. It's not very long. So first up, I'm going to do my little review of Season of Migration to the North. I finished this first. I finished this on Wednesday, but I just haven't had a chance to talk about it since then. I kind of also feel like I needed a couple days to unpack a little bit, and I'm not certain I'm done unpacking, honestly. So this book is about our unnamed narrator. I believe he is never named, but he is a man from Sudan. He lives in a tiny village off the Nile in Sudan. I believe the book, it's about 1960 where it takes place. And he gets an opportunity to go study in England, where he gets an advanced degree in English poetry. And then where this book starts with him returning to his village after getting his degree and meeting a sort of mysterious man who has recently moved to the village named Mustafa Saeed, who also was studied in England. So the narrator and Mustafa Saeed meet each other and sort of start to get to know each other, and then a decent chunk of the book is actually just Mustafa's story and his time. It's talking about his time in England. So that's sort of the general plot. I don't really feel like I should say too much more. I feel like it's not a plot-heavy book. I don't know if I could do a ton of spoilers. Even if I wanted to. Though I will also say I feel like the characters are a little thin as well. It's more so a book about ideas than about specific characters or plot. So I think that this book is beautifully written. I'm definitely going to read you a couple quotes here in a little bit. I think it's really, really well written. It's very beautiful. This is translated from Arabic by Dennis Johnson Davies. I think they did a really good job capturing the beauty of this book. I also highlighted a bunch. I actually didn't do any highlighting, I guess. I just marked passages that I really liked. I thought there was a lot of really beautiful, beautiful passages in here. I also just marked some things that I thought were relevant for the themes and whatnot. Yeah, I don't know exactly how I feel about this book. I think I almost did it a disservice by reading it at the same time as Woman at Point Zero, which I will talk about next, and I will kind of get into more so why that is. But I felt like I was a little bit unsure what exactly the author was trying to say. Specifically, I'm a little bit curious. I'd be curious to hear more what this author was thinking about in regards to gender roles. There's several women characters in this book, and most of them have a sort of ending and character arc that I'm it doesn't sit great with me, but I don't know if that is intentional on his part or not, if that makes any sense. I'm trying to kind of talk around the plot, but I will get into that a little bit more when I talk about Women at Point Zero anyways. So, however, the other major messaging about this book is basically about colonization and the sort of inherited violence of colonization, and he compares it a lot to a disease that has been, it originated in these colonizing countries, but that by coming over to colonize these people, they spread the disease, and the violence and just sort of horrific acts of colonization spread like a disease. And so pulling away from colonizing these countries, there's going to be a series of events of unrest as these people try to find their way back to how they operated before colonization, and the way they operate after colonization has been infected by the disease of colonization. And so I think it's really insightful in that, especially in the time period that it's set and the time period it came out. I think this was especially poignant, and I would argue still poignant to this day. It's a long-standing issue that the inherited violence and horrors of colonization have sort of absolutely fundamentally changed these cultures, and finding their way back to sort of a way of operating that works for them has proven to be extremely difficult. So it was interesting, the introduction of this book referenced Patrice Lumumba from the Congo, who was the first elected, I think he was prime minister of the Congo, which I was literally just talked about him the other day with my reading of the Poisonwood Bible. So this was actually an excellent follow-up to that, because I kept talking in that book about how I'd like to read something from the colonized perspective rather than the colonizer perspective. So this did a great job of that. And yeah, I think that he just had a really poignant and insightful, especially at the time, like the way he was able to see and understand the impacts of colonization and what the long-term impacts would be. I think that it was really insightful that he was able to write this book at the time that it came out. So I could see maybe if you read it today, you might be like, yeah, duh, of course, like that was the impacts of colonization. But I think that his ability to see things for how they were at the time is pretty impressive. Yeah, definitely I think it is a good book, but maybe not like my absolute favorite. And from what I've read around on the internet, I should probably check out a couple more of his books, because I loved the way he wrote, and I would be interested if he has anything that's a little bit more like character focused. I think would be pretty fascinating to check out. So, and maybe something that has a little bit less violence towards women, which I understand is like completely relevant and is totally a part of the discussion, but I'm not 100% certain. I loved the way it was handled all of the time in this book. And I think that is only so poignant to me because of my sort of simultaneous reading of Woman at Point Zero. Anyways, let me read a couple quotes. Okay, I'm gonna skip over some parts of this because otherwise I'll be reading forever. But they were surprised when I told them that Europeans were, with minor differences, exactly like them, marrying and bringing up their children in accordance with principles and traditions, that they had good morals and were in general good people. I preferred not to say the rest. Just like us, they are born and die, and in the journey from cradle to grave, they dream dreams, some of which come true and some of which are frustrated, that they fear the unknown, search for love and seek contentment in wife and child, that some are strong and some are weak, that some have been given more than they deserve by life, while others have been deprived by it. Okay, next one is, by the standards of the European industrial world, we are poor peasants. But when I embrace my grandfather, I experience a sense of richness as though I am a note in the heartbeats of the very universe. He is no towering oak tree with luxuriant branches growing out in a land on which nature has bestowed water and fertility. Rather, he is like the sayal bushes in the deserts of the Sudan, thick of bark and sharp of thorn, defeating death because they ask so little of life. Okay, here's my last one. This is the other one I was looking for. The ships at first sailed down the Nile carrying guns, not bread, and the railways were originally set up to transport troops. The schools were started so as to teach us how to say yes in their language. They imported to us the germ of the greatest European violence, as seen on the Somme at the Verdun, the likes of which the world has never previously known, the germ of a deadly disease that struck them more than 1,000 years ago. Yes, my dear sirs, I came as an invader to your very homes, a drop of the poison which you have injected into the veins of history. Okay, that is Season of Migration to the North. Let me see. I'm gonna go with, I think I would give this an enjoyment score of 2. Yeah, I think I would give this an enjoyment score of 2. There's definitely nothing fun that happens in this book, I would say. And there's definitely some pretty dark bits. There's some violence, and yeah, definitely look up trigger warnings if that is something that impacts you greatly. There's a little bit of everything, I feel like, in this book. So yeah, solid 2 enjoyment, and I think I would go an excellence of 4 on this. I think I almost want to even go almost towards like a 4.5. I think that this is a really important piece of literature. I think it's a really beautifully written piece of literature. From what I understand, as just sort of an Arabic language book, it is like pillar on which their literature world is based. So I know it is very important to the Arabic language. I think that final half star for me is just a little bit of like a failure to make the messaging like a tiny bit clearer. And that could be just like a me thing, like I'm coming at it from the wrong culture, from the wrong perspective. Like I just don't quite, it was just a tiny piece of connection with the book that I was missing, like a teeny tiny piece. And again, that could very well be a me problem. That is Season of Migration to the North by Tayeb Salih. Okay, next up, I finished the audiobook for Woman at Point Zero by Nawal El-Saadawi. So first I want to talk about this author a little bit because I looked her up before starting the book and was just like amazed. So this is Nawal El-Saadawi. She's an Egyptian woman who was born in 1931. She received a medical degree and was a practicing psychiatrist in Egypt, where she focused a lot of her energy on women and women's issues and the oppression of women. And she did some serious feminist writing and work in her time that got her in a lot of trouble. At one point, it seems like she had her medical license revoked and she was in jail for a little while. So this woman is a force of nature. I can't believe I've never heard of her. And she actually died not that long ago in 2021. So kind of a shame I hadn't heard of her before then. But that's my tiny bit of background on this author. So then specifically this book, it starts with a foreword from the author talking about her time. I think it was after she had gotten in trouble. I don't know if she got fully her medical license revoked or if she just wasn't allowed to like practice anymore. And she started doing a project where she was traveling to prisons and interviewing women that were imprisoned in Egypt. And she was especially heavily impacted by a certain story of a woman who was sentenced to death for killing a man. And she just talked in the foreword about how this woman's specific story like really impacted her and stayed with her for a long time, even when she got sent to prison herself later. Crazy story. So this book is inspired by the story of this woman who was sentenced to death and killed for the murder of a man in Egypt. So first and foremost, I gotta say this is a really heavy book. It's a very tough read. It's not one to be just like silly, goofy, taken lightly. It's really heavy. It was making me like a little bit physically sick at times. I am sure that there are people who would describe this as like trauma porn because it is one of those books where like nothing goes right at any point in time, and it's sort of like relentless in the horrors that this woman experiences. So most of the book is just the story of this woman. I think it's like a mostly fictionalized, or sort of, my guess is sort of like a culmination of like the many stories that this author heard in her time interviewing the women in the prison system of Egypt. I'm guessing this isn't all just something that happened specifically to one specific woman. I hope, though I'm certain there are women where this is the case. So the book starts out with the narrator character, I guess. She's only in like the very first tiny chapter. She is interviewing women at a prison in Egypt, so we can tell where the inspiration came from, obviously. And she hears about a woman, a prostitute who killed a man and is on death row. And so she starts interviewing this woman, and then the book kind of takes over the perspective of the prostitute, and she tells the story from like her very early childhood until this very moment. So as you can imagine, I mean, a woman doesn't get into that situation without having gone through some crazy stuff in her life, obviously. So it's tough. It's a really tough read. But I thought it was really powerful. I thought the story was really powerful. I thought it was well written. It has this device that kind of got a little bit old where it repeats things a lot, like whole passages. Like there are certain events in her life, you know, when she's a child and when she's an adult that I think feels like we're mirroring each other, and the passages are like almost word for word identical, which I think I'm taking to interpret as like this character was never given a chance to develop a personality, like her own personality and her own feelings about things, because she's been in just like horrible distress since she was basically a child. And so when she feels a similar or a familiar feeling, all she knows is how that feeling made her feel. She can't put a word to what that feeling is. And so there's these passages where an event happens and you can tell she's feeling something that she knows she's felt before, but she doesn't know what it is. And the author uses like repetition to make that sort of parallel. At least that's how I was interpreting it. And at times the repetition did get a tiny bit old to me. So that's literally my only complaint about the whole book. Otherwise, I thought it was amazing. It's just horrible to read. So, take that with you before you pick this up. I listened to the audiobook, which I thought the narrator she did a phenomenal job of like bringing out the emotion. And there's a lot of feelings in this book, and I think she does an amazing job of that. Although she did have a tendency to take really long pauses. I'm guessing there was like page breaks or line breaks. There was occasionally a time where she would pause for so long that I would start to get my phone out, thinking that I had accidentally paused the story. So otherwise, I think that the narrator for the audiobook did an incredible job. And I do wish I had the physical copy, because I would have been highlighting the absolute hell out of this book. So I really liked this. Again, it is a really, really tough read. So keep that in mind. And like I mentioned before, it was really interesting to read this in tandem with Season of Migration to the North, because they both feature sort of this discussion about how women are treated in this. They're pretty similar time periods, and they're similar geographic locations. Woman at Point Zero kind of just takes place up the Nile. So they have similar religious practices that they both discuss, such as female circumcision. And I believe that Nawal El-Saadawi did a better job of exploring those themes in a very compassionate and thoughtful way. Just in that it was very clear to me that she was condemning these things, if that makes sense. Just condemning the treatment of women. And this book is very much so about the horrors of the treatment of women in this area, in this time period. And so then reading it alongside Season of Migration to the North, which isn't necessarily about gender roles, though it talks about women and it talks about sex a lot. So it was very interesting to see the much more distant, disimpassioned way that Sayeb Tali wrote about it, compared to, all of a sudden I'm blanking on this author's name, the Egyptian author, what the hell? Nawal El-Saadawi. Compared to Nawal El-Saadawi. I think I'm saying her name different every time. I'm sorry. I'm trying to say it the way the audiobook narrator said it, but I feel like I'm saying it different every time. Anyways, it was just very obvious. It's just became so incredibly apparent to me how important it is to have women who are writing about these things, because I just felt that the way she approached these subjects was so much more thoughtful and compassionate. Not that Tayeb Salih was not being thoughtful. It just was it just felt that he wasn't as passionate about talking about the horrors of what some of these women are experiencing, I guess, if that makes sense. Hopefully I expressed myself decently well with all that. I would give Woman at Point Zero easy. It's a 1 on the enjoyment scale. This is exactly what I'm talking about when I do these sorts of scales. This is an easy 1. The only other book that's been so easy to give a 1 on the enjoyment scale is Beloved by Toni Morrison. And I feel spiritually there is a lot of similarities. There's similarities to these things, the oppression of women in an already sort of oppressed group of people, and the just extent of what they will go to when pushed to their absolute limit. Both of these books are sort of about those things, and they're tough reads. So absolutely check out trigger warnings for Woman at Point Zero if that is something that affects you. And then I would do excellence of 4, I think, because like I mentioned, there was just a little bit of the repetition that I thought got a little bit old in this book, but otherwise I thought it was incredible. I thought it was really, really well written. Just the emotions it was evoking in me within a half hour of starting it. I was oh my God, this is going to be a really tough read, because I was a half hour in and I was like choking back tears, it felt like. So that is Woman at Point Zero. I have some quotes that I saved that I like literally paused the audiobook and typed into my phone because I liked so much. So let me actually just, I have them on my phone and you're on my, maybe I'll do like a little, like a voiceover section. Hopefully that was long enough. Okay. So now I will definitely make it my goal to crack out the rest of Things Fall Apart. I want to say the author's name is Chinua Achebe. Is that right? I will get it right when I come back to talk about it officially. So I'm only like 17% of the way through. I don't yet have, I have thoughts already, but they're not fully formed yet. So I will see you then. Hello once again and welcome back. I have completed Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. As of yesterday, like midday, I completed this book. So really quick sort of plot summary is this book is about a family in Nigeria in no date is given. Let me look actually really quickly. So this book takes place in a fictional village in Nigeria, and it follows a specific family. It's like sort of a few of the like main members of the family are talked about pretty heavily. And then specifically and particularly this book is a lot about the father named Okonkwo, and he's married, he has 3 wives, and then they have like a bunch of children, and it's about several members of this specific family, but particularly about the father. So it's a fictional Igbo village in colonial Nigeria. I don't have a specific date that I can find, like where it's meant to be set. I might keep looking, and if I see that, I might put it on screen somewhere. So the first like 60% of this book is sort of just a very slow, thoughtful introduction to this fictional village. It talks about like their mythology. It talks about their sort of holidays, I'll call them, or like big events that they hold. It talks about their year. What does their year look like? When do they harvest? When do they plant? What do they harvest? What's their like currency like? What's their mythology like? That's basically the whole first 60%. It's a very like slow sort of vignettes of just different pieces of the culture of this little village. Like, how do they operate? So I honestly thought the first 60% was like quite slow. I don't know specifically why. I just felt like I was reading this book and I'd be like, oh my God, I've been reading forever. And I'd look and I'd been reading for like 17 minutes. I don't know what. It's not like hard to read. It's not a difficult book to read. I don't know specifically what that's about. That's probably on me. But anyways, the point is, after that 60%, things begin to fall apart. Specifically, what I mean by that is the very rapid change in the culture of this village upon the arrival of white missionaries from Europe. So I think that the like sort of structure of the book is really clever in that way. It sort of establishes, this first 60% really establishes this feeling that like this is the way things have always been, this is the way things will always be, this is the way this culture works and operates. And it really shows you that they work well, they have a system that works really well for them, there's no serious issues. There's certainly aspects of their culture that are not amazing. Particularly the treatment of women is not always great. There's definitely some violence that's very like inherent in the way the leader men operate and go about business, but they have their set of rules, they have their beliefs, they have their gods, they have the way that they operate, and it is very well fleshed out. They have a very complex and elaborate culture specifically surrounding their gods and their values. So the first 60% does an amazing job setting that up, and it makes you feel like, kind of lulls you into a false sense of security that like they're good, they have their shit figured out. Obviously there's room for improvement, particularly in like the way women are treated and the way women are getting beat a lot. And then the extremely rapid sort of decline after the arrival of the missionaries is really, really interesting. The way it very quickly destabilizes this culture that they have had established for so long, and sort of he gets a little bit into the like mechanisms by which that happens. So I thought that was really cool. This book is like super famous. At least the Wikipedia page claims it's like one of the most translated books of all time. Like, it's been translated more than almost any other book. Obviously there's a few books I'm sure that have more so, but I feel like it was extremely effective in what it was trying to do. And it's interesting to me. This is an idea that, I guess, a seed that has been planted in my mind specifically from the introduction to Petals of Blood. What is his name? Is it Ngugi wa Thiong'o? The introduction to that book was talking a lot about how that specific author, he's from Kenya, and he was writing for Kenyan people. Like, it was talking a lot about this sort of idea of an African novel for African people versus an African novel for a westernized audience, and about writing their book in their original language and, you know, writing just for the people of that culture. And I was just thinking about that while reading this book, that Things Fall Apart felt to me like it was not written for Nigerian people necessarily. There was just there was a glossary of terms in the back, and it would, you know, introduce something like a concept or a term and then like explain it fully in the text, which to me is extremely, extremely useful. It definitely gives you a better sense of the culture and you feel like you understand it better, certainly. But I am curious if that is, I don't know, just what the sort of African scholars think about it. Is this a book for Western audiences, or is this a book for Nigerian audiences? I'm assuming it was originally written in English, because the way the like Nigerian vocabulary is used, it's always italicized, and, you know, a word is dropped and then it'll have that word and then like a little brief explanation of what that word means a lot of the time. Or if it doesn't, then in the back of the book it will tell you. So I don't know. I don't know if that's really that important. I just was curious thinking about it. And I think that maybe the movement towards like African books for African people might have been like a little bit later on in history, because I think this book came out in like the 50s. So maybe it was more so at that time just about getting word out. Like, hey, you know, we used to be a fully formed culture who operated perfectly well on our own before we were invaded. It's probably mostly the message of this book. I don't know if I'm even going to leave that in the video because I don't know if anybody cares. But I thought it was good. It actually was reminding me a lot of Half of the Yellow Sun. I'm not going to try and remember that author's name off the top of my head, but they're both set in Nigeria. And Half of the Yellow Sun is set like in the 60s. And the impression I get is that Things Fall Apart is set before this quite a bit. But it's really, I think it's fun to read both of these books and you get sort of an idea of the way this sort of tribal culture is still prevalent in like more modern Nigerian history, because they kept talking about things that I was like, oh yeah, I remember that from Half of the Yellow Sun. Like, I remember them talking about this thing. So honestly, I think that those two books as sort of a tandem read would be kind of interesting and fun. And Half of the Yellow Sun is about it's set in the 60s, I believe. So it's about the sort of overthrow of the establishment in Nigeria at that time and trying to take back, you know, sort of the African pride, the Nigerian pride, trying to take back for themselves. But it's kind of a bloody situation in the 60s. So I didn't realize until I started this book that it is apparently a trilogy. So I think it continues to follow this family after the events of this book. So I'm guessing it will get into the sort of more modern issues of Nigeria. It might even kind of lead right up into the events of Half of a Yellow Sun. So that would be interesting to continue as well. I don't know if my library had the other two books though. So anyways, I don't know if I have that much more to say about this. I think reading these 3 books in 1 week was an interesting thing to do, but I thought they would be in conversation with each other a little bit better than they were. I think what I ended up doing was just comparing them to each other and picking out the things I really liked about one and being like, I wish I liked the way that one did that better. So for example, like I think that Season of Migration to the North was the most beautifully written of the 3. I thought it was really, really beautifully written. And then I thought that Woman at Point Zero did the most interesting things with talking about women and just sort of gender issues in general, especially because these other 2 books were written by men. You know, they feature a lot of this sort of violence against women, but it just never feels like they're that upset about it to me, especially when compared to just the extreme amount of feelings that are put into Woman at Point Zero regarding how she feels about that. And then I thought that Things Fall Apart had by far the most interesting setup in regards to talking about the culture that was originally in this sort of Igbo tribe of Nigeria area. It was really interesting to hear that sort of history before the colonization, because both of the other 2 books I read were sort of after that. So I really liked getting that sort of context. It just makes you appreciate what they had going on before they were interrupted by the missionaries a little bit better. And I think that I'm still thinking of the other books I've read from Africa. I would say Nervous Conditions and Petals of Blood also do a little bit of that, like setup of the sort of tribal culture and like explaining to you what this place looks like on its own. They do a little bit of that, both of those books. And I just really like that. I think it gives you a little bit more depth and understanding of these different countries, which is what I'm doing in trying to read from all these different countries. You know, I want to hear about their little cultures and traditions and what sort of things are like the beautiful parts of their culture, you know, outside of like Season of Migration to the North. I don't feel like it ever gave me a great feeling about the beautiful and unique parts of this Sudan culture outside of the westernization, if that makes any sense. So enjoyment, I think I would put the enjoyment like right in the middle on Things Fall Apart. I think I would go even, 2.5 enjoyment. The only sort of dark things happen at the end. It ends pretty sad, but the beginning 60%, while there are, you know, it's sort of ups and downs of good things and bad things happening, getting immersed in the mythology of this tribe especially, I thought was really fun. I love hearing a parable. It's so fun to hear a little parable from a different culture. It always makes me smile. And certainly I would say it was nowhere near as dark and heavy as Woman at Point Zero. Like it never got nearly that bad. And it wasn't as violent as Season of Migration to the North either, I don't think. And then excellence scale, I think I would give this a 4 as well. I know it's just like sort of a seminal text in African literature. It's definitely made an important impact. I just think that the excellence, there's just sort of a factor about it that was, for me, not all that engaging in the beginning especially. I'm not sure specifically what that was about, but for me, I just sort of felt like it was dragging a little at the beginning. So, and I understand contextually why. I felt like he was trying to establish a very peaceful, quiet, and long-standing culture, and in doing that, it felt to me like very slow. Yeah, no, I'm going to keep it as a 4 excellence, because I didn't feel anything particularly beautiful about the prose. It was very almost utilitarian in its prose, I thought. That is Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. I finished my 3 African books. I have now visited Sudan, Egypt, and Nigeria this week, which was very fun. I think if I do another one of these reading around the world vlogs, I'll do a different continent each time. I don't know if I want to just like focus on Africa. I feel like I might go to South America next. I have some book ideas for that. Maybe South and Central America even. We'll see. So if you have any South or Central American book recommendations, I would love to hear them. I've read a little bit of an Isabella Allende book. She's from Chile. I read like half of House of Spirits by her, and I wasn't really vibing with it, but I kind of feel like it's worth revisiting. I've also read Elena Knows by, what is her name? Claudia Pinheiro, maybe? And I want to say she's Argentinian. I have, of course, read 100 Years of Solitude by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. It's right there. So that's Guatemala, Chile, Argentina. I have on my shelf a book from Brazil, and I think, very, very easily find a book from Mexico. That would not be a problem, considering where I live in the US. Anyways, I would love to hear South American literature recommendations, especially by women. That is of particular interest to me, and I especially like it when they have sort of a historical event in historical context where you can learn a little bit about the historical situation of a country. Beyond that, I'm gonna wrap this up. I don't know, should I do a ranking? I absolutely loved and adored Woman at Point Zero. I thought that book was incredible. I think that would be my number one. And then I think Season of Migration to the North would be number two, just because I thought it was really, really beautiful in the way it was written, which would put Things Fall Apart at third. But they're all a high. It's not I hated Things Fall Apart. It just wasn't as engaging to me as the other two. So maybe I just like an Arabic book better. I don't know. It's interesting. Anyways, I had a great time doing this with you, and I have sort of a silly video planned next. We'll see if I can get it out as quickly as I'd like to, but it'll be kind of a nice change of pace because this is kind of a heavy week. So we'll do a silly one next. All right, thank you for hanging out with me today. Thanks for watching if you've watched this far, and let's keep reading.